In November of 1890, the United States government didn't send soldiers to stop a war. They sent them to stop a dance. They called it a frenzy, a madness, an outbreak. But when you read the actual telegrams the Indian agents sent back to Washington that winter, buried now in the National Archives, you find something the history books rarely say out loud. Washington wasn't afraid of the weapons. The dancers barely had any. Washington was afraid of the prophecy, because the man who started this movement wasn't calling for blood. He was calling for a new world. And the people in power understood, correctly, that an idea like that was far more dangerous than a gun. This is the story of the ghost dance, the vision behind it, and how the most peaceful movement on the American plains ended in one of its greatest atrocities. To understand why a dance could frighten a nation, you have to understand what the dancers believed was about to happen. It began with a single man. His name was Wovoka, though many settlers knew him as Jack Wilson. He was a Northern Paiute from the Walker River country in Nevada, and on the first day of January in 1889, something happened to him that would ripple across the entire American West. On that day, there was a total eclipse of the sun. Wovoka was burning with fever, so sick that some accounts say he died and came back. And while he was gone, he said, he was carried up into the spirit world. There he was given a message. If the people danced a certain dance, lived clean lives, told the truth, harmed no one, and refused violence, then the earth would be made new. The dead would return. The buffalo would come back in numbers no living person had seen, and the suffering of the reservation years would be wiped away. By the summer of 1890, this message had spread across thousands of miles. Ceremonies were being held with 7,000 and 8,000 people at once. And that is when the newspapers noticed. That is when the fear began. The man at the center of this panic had never held a rifle in anger. Wovoka's teaching was not a war cry. It was almost the opposite. His rules were simple and they were strict. Do not hurt anyone. Do not fight. Do not lie. Do not drink. Work hard. Live in peace, even with the settlers. He told his followers that violence would ruin everything, that the new world could only come to people who kept their hands clean. He even forbade the dancers from wearing any metal while they danced. Sit with that for a moment. The prophet, whose movement triggered the largest military deployment in the American West since the Great Sioux War, told his people to put down anything sharp before they danced. The dance itself was a circle. Men and women held hands and moved slowly around a central tree or pole, singing songs that Wovoka said had been given to him in heaven. They danced for days, and in the exhaustion and the rhythm, dancers began to have visions of their own. They saw relatives who had died. They saw the old world, the one before the forts and the fences. For a people who had lost almost everything, this was not madness. It was hope. But hope, when it belongs to people you have conquered, looks like a threat. The agents assigned to the reservations began writing to Washington. Most experienced hands weren't alarmed. Men who had spent years among the Lakota believed the dance would burn itself out by spring if left alone. A former agent named Valentine McGillicuddy said plainly that the smart move was to let the people dance. But that reasonable voice was about to be drowned out by a much louder, much more frightened one. But there was one detail in the prophecy that Washington could not tolerate. To grasp it, you have to see the full shape of Wovoka's vision, the part that went far beyond returning buffalo. Because this was never just about game coming back to the plains. In the versions carried east by Lakota messengers like Kicking Bear and Short Bull, the prophecy described something much larger. A new layer of earth, they said, would roll across the entire land. New soil, deep and rich, would cover the old world completely. And underneath it, the settlements, the towns, the forts, everything the newcomers had built, would be buried. The dancers would be lifted into the air, suspended safely, while this new earth was laid down beneath them. Then they would be set back down onto a healed and living continent, new grass, running water, trees, the buffalo and the wild horses returning in their thousands, and walking among them, the ancestors, brought back to life. If you follow this channel, you already know why that idea should sound familiar. It is the same architecture as the Hopi prophecies of earth changes, the belief that this world is not permanent, that it can be wiped clean and reset, that a corrupt age can end and a renewed one can begin. The ghost dance was, in its own way, a desperate attempt to trigger exactly that, a spiritual reboot of an entire continent. Wovoka wasn't just predicting the return of the buffalo, he was predicting the end of the country itself. Now understand how that landed in Washington. Here was a movement, spreading uncontrollably, tens of thousands strong, openly teaching that the United States was about to be swallowed by the earth and replaced. It did not matter that the mechanism was spiritual. It did not matter that the dancers were forbidden to fight. To officials watching the movement swell, the message sounded like the announcement of their own erasure. And frightened institutions do not respond to spiritual claims with theology. They respond with soldiers. Then came the shirts. Among the Lakota, the dance took on a new element that Wovoka had never taught. Some dancers began making special garments, painted muslin shirts decorated with sacred symbols, stars, birds, and images from their visions, and a belief attached itself to them. These ghost shirts, some said, could stop a bullet. Here's where you have to be careful, because this single detail did more damage than almost anything else. The press seized on it. Newspapers across the country ran with the image of fanatics who thought cloth could turn away lead, primitive people lost in delusion. It made the dancers sound irrational and dangerous, exactly the picture the War Department needed. But look closer, and the story fractures. Wovoka's original teaching forbade metal and forbade violence. The ghost shirt, in that light, was never armor for battle. It was a symbol of protection through faith, worn by people who had no intention of fighting anyone. The question historians still argue over is this: did the Lakota truly march into danger believing they were bulletproof? Or was that belief exaggerated, sharpened, and broadcast to make a peaceful people look like an army of zealots who had to be put down? Either way, the narrative had done its work. The dancers had been transformed, on paper, from worshippers into warriors. The panic now had a face. His name was Daniel Royer. Royer was appointed Indian agent at the Pine Ridge Reservation in October of 1890. He got the job through political connections, not competence, and he was in over his head from the first day. The Lakota took his measure almost immediately and gave him a name that told you everything. They called him Young Man, Afraid of Indians. Within a week of arriving, Royer was already writing to Washington that he might need troops. And on the 15th of November, 1890, he sent the telegram that would help set everything in motion. His words were these: "Indians are dancing in the snow and are wild and crazy. Nothing short of 1,000 soldiers will settle this dancing." Read that again. Not 1,000 soldiers to stop a war, 1,000 soldiers to stop a dance. Royer demanded that the leaders be arrested and locked away in a military post until the movement was crushed. He wrote that he needed protection, and he needed it now. And the terrible thing is, the machine above him was already primed to believe him. 2 days earlier, on the 13th of November, President Benjamin Harrison had ordered a body of troops, in his words, sufficiently large to be impressive, sent to the reservations. So they stopped calling it a religion. They started calling it an insurrection. What followed was staggering. The government poured soldiers onto the northern plains until it had assembled the largest military force in the region since the Great Sioux War of 1876. Cavalry, infantry, and artillery converged on people whose great crime was dancing in the cold and praying for a better world. And the Lakota knew exactly what the dance was. Chief Little Wound sent word that could not have been clearer. "Our dance is a religious dance," he said, "and we are going to dance until spring. If Christ does not appear, we will stop, but not before. Troops or no troops." This was not the language of an uprising. It was the language of people asking to be left alone to worship. But the presence of the soldiers did not calm anything. It did the opposite. It confirmed to the dancers that the outside world meant them harm, and it hardened their resolve. The plains were now a coiled spring, and it only needed one hand to pull the trigger. That hand belonged to another agent at another reservation. At Standing Rock, Agent James McLaughlin decided the way to break the movement was to remove its most famous name. He ordered the arrest of Sitting Bull, the legendary leader who had helped defeat Custer years earlier. There was just one problem. Sitting Bull was not even a ghost dance leader. He was a symbol, a target of convenience. On the 15th of December, 1890, Indian police moved in to take him. A struggle broke out, shots were fired, and when it ended, Sitting Bull lay dead. The one man whose stature might have held the peace was gone, killed in the very operation meant to preserve order. The killing sent a shock through the reservations. A Minneconjou band led by a chief named Spotted Elk, often called Bigfoot, set out across the frozen country. Bigfoot was known as a negotiator, a calming voice, and he was actually traveling toward Pine Ridge in hopes of easing the tension. But to the army, a band of ghost dancers on the move looked like a threat escaping. Soldiers were dispatched to intercept them. They caught up with Bigfoot's people near a creek called Wounded Knee. On the morning of the 29th of December, 1890, the 7th Cavalry surrounded the encampment. This was Custer's old regiment, and now it held roughly 500 men and 4 rapid-fire Hotchkiss guns aimed down at a few hundred Lakota, more than half of them women and children. The soldiers moved through the camp to disarm the people, to take away the very weapons a peaceful faith had told them not to rely on. Exactly how it began is still debated. A single shot, a struggle over a rifle. But once it started, it did not stop. The Hotchkiss guns opened up on the camp, tearing through the shelters. When the firing finally ended, roughly 300 Lakota were dead. Men, women, children, and elders, cut down in the snow. Some were found miles away, killed as they tried to flee. They told the world they were disarming a threat. But look at what the record actually shows. The threat could not fight back with prophecy. It could not be reasoned away, because you cannot argue a people out of hope. So a movement that Washington could not control with fear was instead met with bullets and then rewritten in the aftermath as a battle rather than a massacre. The Army handed out roughly 25 medals of honor for Wounded Knee, medals awarded for a fight so chaotic that much of the soldiers' own casualties likely came from their own crossfire. Sit with that. They silenced a movement that they could not control with bullets, so they used them anyway, and then they pinned medals on the men who did it. And the prophecy itself. When the ghost shirts did not stop the bullets, and the new earth did not come, the heart went out of the movement. Most followers set the dance aside. Wovoka, the quiet Paiute, who had only ever preached peace, was horrified by what his vision had become and by the threats now aimed at him. He withdrew from public life. But he never renounced his faith, and he lived, respected by those who knew him, until 1932. The dance that was supposed to remake the world instead became a mirror, showing exactly what the people in power feared most. Because here is the truth underneath all of it. Washington was never truly afraid that cloth could stop bullets, or that a few thousand exhausted dancers would storm the forts. What it feared was the idea, the belief that this order was not permanent, that a conquered people could look at the whole arrangement of American power and calmly say, "This world is ending, and a better one is coming to take its place. You cannot arrest that. You cannot disarm it." And that is precisely why it terrified them. So if Washington was this afraid of a dance in 1890, ask yourself what they are afraid of now. Because the Lakota were not the only nation on this continent who saw an ending coming. Far to the east, in the old country of the Cherokee, there was another prophecy, older and stranger. They too spoke of a reckoning. But they said it would not fall from the sky or rise from the plains. They said it would come from inside the mountains. That is a story for the next investigation. If this opened your eyes to the history you were never taught, take a second to subscribe, so the next one finds you when it drops. And tell me in the comments, do you think the ghost dance was only a movement of grief, or were the dancers reaching for something real? I'll see you in the next one.